And Mr. Schweich is beginning his presentation.
I have a website you might want to jot down, Audit at auditor.mo.gov. If I can't get to your question, you can email us with that question and we will answer you promptly after the fact. This district is the 18th largest school district in Missouri, operating revenues of $121 million. It's a large enterprise. We audit generally. When we do the audits, we focus on 1 year, but because of some of the things we found, we ended up going back 8 or 10 years on some of them. But the focus of the audit is the year ending June 30th, 2014, the fiscal year. As our normal practice is, when we find serious problems, we will start to look further back. So you'll hear me talking about some practices that have been in existence for many years, in fact. But we focus generally on 1 year. Now, when I became auditor a little over 4 years ago, and I had the honor of starting to serve you all as a state auditor, I put in a grading system that had not been done before. Now, every entity we audit either gets an excellent, a good, a fair, or a poor. The criteria that are used to determine what that grade will be are published on our website, and they're very specific. Unfortunately, the school district here tonight received a poor rating. It is the first school district I've audited in over 4 years that received a poor rating. So poor rating means there are serious and extensive management deficiencies occurring over a long period of time that require immediate attention and corrective action. The good news is that when we met with the board and discussed with them the results of the audit a few weeks back, we think that they recognize the seriousness and the level and the depth of the problems that were uncovered, and we believe that they plan to correct all those problems. And to that effect, which a couple of other school districts have done, they're going to be setting up a website so that you can monitor their implementation of the recommendations over the next few months. Another thing we put in place when I became auditor is a follow-up team. Any entity that gets a fair or a poor on the grading system, we come back 90 to 120 days later. We look to see if the corrective action we asked for occurred, and then we will issue a follow-up report so you will be able to see whether the problems we're addressing here tonight have actually been remedied by the district. And because of the number of problems, we'll probably give them a little more than 90 days, but 3 to 4 months from now we'll be back and we'll issue a second report so that you all can see the level of compliance. Now, my objective here, I also say, is not to settle political disputes or scores. All we're interested in the auditor's office is identifying issues and correcting them. We also don't focus much on individuals. Other law enforcement entities are around. They're here tonight. As you know, there's an FBI investigation going on. That limits to a minor degree what I can say tonight because we don't want to compromise the results of that investigation. But I think you'll see I'll have plenty to say and plenty for you all to think about tonight. We expended over 2,000 hours on this audit, and we found significant problems. Let me go over now. You have the audit in front of you, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to go in the order of the audit, and I'm going to summarize what was in there. I won't say everything in there, but just give you an overall summary, and then you can read the audit itself to see all the details. The first finding relates to district compensation. We found that the district's use of salary schedules and a stipend system had resulted in a confusing, inconsistently applied, and poorly documented system of compensation. So bad, really the worst we've seen, that it almost functioned as sort of a slush fund outside the regular scope of board approval, and this went on for many, many years. Salary schedules and employment contracts were problematic. District officials did not provide the school board all the salary schedules for approval, and those that they did provide were incomplete. For example, the Human Resources Director did not provide the salary schedules for Hilliard Technical Center at all for board approval. They were eventually approved after the fact. Those totaled $2.3 million just for the 2013 and 2014 school year alone. There were no individual salary schedules for parents as teachers, educators, or summer school teacher salaries. The district's placement or advancement of some employees on advanced salary schedules is not always documented in accordance with policy or the school board requirements. For example, there was a warehouse supervisor promoted in August of 2013 from maintenance supervisor salary schedule to technical director. However, the promotion was not supported by any documentation detailing any additional duties, and that resulted in an additional $16,000 a year of compensation without any apparent increase in duties or qualifications for that job. And that's just one example of many you'll see in the audit report, but we found that was fairly common. There was no indication school board minutes or personnel files that the school board reviewed and approved there was, in many cases, none of these things were reviewed and approved by the school board. It also did not review certified teacher or administrator employment contracts. There were significant situations where signatures were applied without the review of the school board. That's problematic to us as well. The school district also paid several employees in excess of their contracts. So you have written employment contracts that say a certain amount should be paid, and there were payments made in excess without explanation. So I'll give you one example from the audit, which is the revised contract for the controller said that she was to be paid at step 9 of an assistant director's salary, but in fact was paid at step 8 of a director's salary, which is the difference between $88,000 and $92,000 a year. So that was problematic as well. Perhaps the biggest problem that we found, and I think this is the biggest issue we found here, was the payment of stipends. You all have heard already by reviewing in the media about $250,000 worth of stipends that had not been authorized. We actually went back about 8 years and found that there was over $25 million worth of stipends paid, either unapproved, unauthorized, or improper. Now, in some cases, there were proper stipends paid, but that $25 million is stipends that we found to be problematic over an 8-year period. And we believe, since there's not full documentation going all the way back to 2001, that number could actually be in excess of $40 million. That's a startling sum of money. And I'll give you some examples of what we found. So, for example, the district had stipends totaling $3.8 million for the 2013-2014 school year. That's the main area that we focused on. Annual stipends total approximately $3.3 million for the past 8 years, averaging $3.3 million each of the past 8 years. The school board did not approve approximately 30 of the 83 payroll system categories of extra duty and stipend payments provided just during the 2013-2014 school year alone. These were not included in the salary schedules that the district submitted to the board. Let me give you some examples, just a few examples. Night duty. For 2013-2014, there were $207,500 paid for night duty, which were not properly documented or properly approved. Superintendent's count, and by the way, since 2001, that's $672,000 just for night duty alone, stipends. Superintendent's council, 2013-14, there was $72,000 paid. I think that's been made public previously, but if you go back to 2001, the total amount is $579,000 paid to that group. There were some stipends simply labeled as additional. It wasn't even described what additional was. You've heard about that. In 2013 and 2014, those totaled $168,000. But going back to the year 2000, we were able to identify $2.5 million in, quote, additional stipends without any particular explanation as to what they were for. In addition, payment amounts for several stipends that the board did actually approve did not agree to approve salary schedules or employee contracts. So, for example, some of those were for travel. Now, there are stipends allowed for travel, but these stipends that were paid did not concur with board policy or with the actual contracts. Travel, $324,200 in 2013 and 2014 that were problematic to us. But since 2000, that's $2.4 million that we found problematic. Longevity stipends. $215,000 in 2013, 2014, but you go back to 2000, year 2000, $4.3 million that we found to be problematic. Coordinator stipends listed on salary schedules or employment contracts, but which had some issue with them, totaled $118,000 for 2013 and 2014, and $1.6 million going all the way back to the year 2000. In addition, as you are well aware, there were travel allowances paid to 54 employees in the past fiscal year for $250,000. And in this case, the district did not amend the employees' contracts to account for the increase, and the school board only retroactively approved them when they were made aware of them in February of last year. The district also did not retain documentation for numerous employee stipends to justify payment for responsibilities performed outside their normal contract duties. In many cases, it appeared to us this was just extra pay for the work they were already required to do. One example is the superintendent's council. $9,000 stipends were given to 7 people, but these people are in positions where they normally would be advising the superintendent anyway, and it appeared to us to be excess compensation that was not warranted. Another example is a superintendent received a graduate stipend, but a graduate degree was already required to be hired. So why would you pay an extra stipend for doing something that you're already required to have when you get the job to begin with? And this is just a couple of examples. So the audit details many others. We also asked current district officials why additional stipends were ever given to some employees. They totaled many thousands of dollars over the base salaries. In one case, an HR employee had a base salary of $96,000 and received almost $40,000 worth of stipends, and there was no clear explanation as to why that occurred. The district does not always contract for the number of days an employee is required to work. So, for example, an employee's job duties sometimes requires them to work more days than they're contracted for, requiring additional time stipends, which are legitimate, of course. However, in this case, they were often not in approved salary schedules or otherwise approved by the school board. So that's money that was probably deserved, but the processes and procedures for paying it were not proper. The district also does not have policies governing several other stipend payments made to district employees, including those for obtaining certifications, attending meetings, and participating in professional development opportunities. This is the most problematic thing we found. We were pretty much floored that you're talking about over $25 million in an 8-year period, and we think we can't give you an exact number all the way back to 2000 because the documentation is not complete, but it's quite possible it was over $40 million. Additional compensation, not in the way of stipends. There were also some problems with some non-stipend compensation. For example, a superintendent receives a $500 monthly vehicle allowance, and other employees receive various travel stipends, which is meant to be reimbursed for driving personal vehicles within the district for business. We made a calculation that some of these people would have to be driving 1,000 miles a month within the district to justify the amount that they were paid for their travel. Overtime payment, there were some problems there too. Board policy is not to pay overtime until an employee has actually worked 40 hours in a week. However, the district did allow some employees overtime when they took vacation and sick leave and included that in the actual time worked. That doesn't amount to a large amount of money, but again, it's a failure of proper procedures. Several employees received additional amounts of overtime compared to their normal salary. One employee earned $18,000 of overtime on a base salary of $35,000. At some point when a lot of overtime is paid, and we see this with a lot of state agencies too, it's better and much more cost effective just to hire somebody else rather than pay the overtime. And we found some examples of that here in the school district. Every time we have findings, particularly with respect to this compensation issue, we make recommendations. And again, while it's sort of startling the amount of money involved, what we're interested in is fixing the problem. That's our objective. And so we've asked that the board conduct a formal compensation study, revise their salary schedules, eliminate unnecessary stipends, of which a lot of them appear to be, provide additional oversight and approval for compensation decisions, and assure that amounts paid agree to contractual amounts authorized. The district has said they are committed to improving, they're committed to putting these recommendations in effect, and we'll be back in a few months to make sure that that actually happened. Overtime policies need to be fixed as well, and the district said they will improve those, and we will be looking at those when we come back as well. That's probably the most important thing we found, but there were a lot of other things, so I'm going to take some time going through them. They don't involve the same amount of money, but they do involve problems with the policies, procedures, and controls. Finding number 2, if you look at finding number 2 in your audit, is payroll procedures. We found that payroll duties are not always adequately segregated. It's very important that multiple people be involved in the payroll process. You never have one person controlling all the money. That can allow for mischief, and there were some issues there. There were not proper controls and procedures. There were some issues with post-retirement employees. Under the codes of the state of Missouri, any teacher or school employees receiving retirement payments, they can't get more than 550 hours per year, and they can't earn more than 50% of the annual salary that they had when they were working. That's actually state law, and we found that there was no monitoring of that going on as to whether they were complying with that aspect of the state law. There's an issue about related employees and nepotism, hiring friends and relatives. The district does not maintain a list of related employees and board members, and the district has not established adequate policies and procedures regarding hiring, supervising, or tracking of related employees. And that's all I'm going to say about this tonight because there are other people looking into that issue. Electronic signatures. The HR department automatically applied school board president and secretary's electronic signatures without running them by those people, so sometimes signatures were applied without people knowing that those signatures have been applied. We looked at personnel records. Those are required to be kept in great detail for school employees, district employees. We found that they were missing very important documentation in some cases, such as employment applications, resumes, educational transcripts, employment transmittals, appraisals, and letters of recommendation. We also found the HR department did not maintain a personnel file for maintenance, parents as teachers, nutrition services, or Hilliard Technical Center employees. There were no files maintained at all for that. We were also concerned a little bit about the personal use of district vehicles. Certain members of the district report use of a personal vehicle as compensation, but then to counter the increased tax liability, the district would pay those people money. That creates all kinds of tax issues and potential liability there as well. Neither the personnel policy nor the school board authorizes personal use of district vehicles, and the district does not monitor the usage of those vehicles. We had some issues with vacation leave payouts. The district does not have a policy governing vacation leave payouts to retiring employees, nor were they authorized in employment contracts or otherwise approved by the school board. The district method of calculating unused leave payouts may have caused some unintended additional costs, which you can read about in a little more detail in the audit. For example, some leave payouts were calculated using all compensation, including all these stipends, which would change the amount that's paid. Others did not include the stipends, so they were inconsistently applied. Our recommendations always flow naturally from what we find. Segregate payroll duties to the extent possible. Require post-retirement employees to maintain timesheets so that we don't violate the 550-hour law. And the district has said they are fully committed to implementing these recommendations, and we're pleased about that. Establish procedures to identify and monitor related employees, obtain related party information, and verify with each employee periodically to make sure there's no improper hiring of related employees. District said they will do that. Make sure when electronic signatures are used that the person whose signature is being affixed has consented and agreed to that. That will be done. Ensure personnel records are complete and maintained in a centralized location. They've said that will occur as well. And establish proper procedures regarding personal use of vehicles and vacation leave time. If you look at finding number 3 in your audit, that's where we are now. We found the district inaccurately reported summer school attendance to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, resulting in overpayment of state aid. You all heard in 2014 that overpayment was $1.8 million. I think what has not been made public was we found a similar problem in 2013 with an overpayment of $1.7 million. So there's a lot of overpayments there. Working with DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the district identified 30 summer school courses and the related 269 students' attendance hours that have been disallowed by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And the reason that sometimes these courses that they take in summer school are disallowed are, for example, the district charged a fee for a sponsored course, which means you can't allow it, or the course was primarily an athletic or band-related item, which doesn't qualify for reimbursement, or the course was a daycare service. So those are the types of situations where you shouldn't be asking for reimbursement from Jefferson City, but the district in some cases was asking to the tune of several $1 million. The district did submit a corrective action plan to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It's a good plan. We hope they'll comply with it, and if they do, everything should be okay going forward. It is possible that there were more overpayments by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for prior years, but we were not able to find documentation relative to that, so we couldn't quantify it if it did occur. Obvious recommendation from that is improve controls over summer school reporting. I think that will be done. We're confident that the administration of the school district will be implementing that recommendation. Finding number 4 in the audit relates to financial condition. Declining state revenue, questionable expenditures, and financial obstacles present a real risk to the financial stability of the school district over the next few years. The school board did approve over $3 million in budget reductions for 2013 and 2014 to help balance the budget due to reductions in state funding. They also approved expenditures and transfers to the capital projects. But we do think for 2014 to 15 that the capital projects fund, there'll be problems with revenues not equaling expenditures, and that's due primarily to increases in employees' salaries and benefits. As you all know, your 63-cent tax levy will expire in August of 2015. That could also cost the school district $6.5 million a year in revenue. The district, I have to say, with all the money paid in stipends, I would say the district would not be in the condition it's in had those stipends been under control. There was a situation that may be a slight understatement. The district, and I don't mean to make fun of anybody, but it is a serious financial issue. And when you're projecting a potential shortfall and you're finding $25 to $40 million in stipends being paid off, you know that's a problem. The district also sold bond through negotiated sales instead of competitively. did not always procure goods and services in a competitive manner, and did incur some unnecessary expenditures, which I'll talk about in just a minute. You also have some bonds that are called QZA bonds, the Qualified Zone Academy bonds. That's a federal government program by which the bondholder actually gets a tax credit rather than an interest payment. We've seen this in a few others. The Grandview School District also had that type of a program going on when we audited them. But to be eligible, the district must have written commitments from private entities willing to make contributions equal to at least 10% of the bond proceeds. We found that there were serious issues with complying with the QZA program. The district had not kept separate accounting records for all QZA revenues, which is required by law. And expenditures for the 2013 issuance, which was about $2.7 million, did not identify proper categories of costs and costs incurred. Failure to spend 100% of the bond proceeds for the qualified expenditures within 3 years can also result in the forfeiture of unused bond proceeds, which would be really basically just giving money away. So we hope that'll be corrected as well. The bond compliance officer did not issue the required report on compliance with the district's tax and securities law compliance procedures also. So that required report needs to be issued going forward. Bond financing, I mentioned there was over $31 million worth of bonds in 2012 and 2013 that were sold through negotiated instead of competitive sales. I did an audit a few years back covering the statewide situation, and we determined that if school districts statewide would use competition rather than negotiated sales, meaning you compete out and try to get the best interest rate you can get for the school district rather than simply negotiating, statewide we could save about $10 million a year for school districts. So we're very big advocates of competition. Part of our job is to advocate for competition because the fact of the matter is that's the way our free market system works. With more competition, you get lower prices. With less competition, you get higher prices. So we're asking, of course, that the school district ensures separate accounting for bond proceeds, file required reports, pursue open competition. And I think that they'll give serious consideration to that recommendation. I want to talk a little about procurement procedures, the way the school district buys things, whether it be services or goods or construction or engineering, whatever they might need to buy. I want to talk a little bit about what we found with respect to the procurement procedures used by the school district. The district did not obtain quotes for playground equipment, almost $70,000, lockers, $15,000. For P cards and fuel purchases, there were frequently no competition. And there was a 3D printer purchased for $45,000 without any justification for why there was no competition or looking for multiple bidders for that. The board policy does not actually require competitive bidding. A lot of school districts do for purchases over a certain amount. Sometimes it's $5,000, sometimes it's $10,000, sometimes as high as $15,000. We recommend that there be an actual requirement for competitive bidding at a certain level. You all can decide what it should be. It's a good practice and it should be put into practice, we think. Professional services, the district does not have a comprehensive policy about procuring professional services. There was a lot of sole source purchases, meaning they didn't go to multiple people, they just went to one person for such things as special education services. That was a $264,000 contract during our audit year. Professional development services, about $180,000. Behavioral consultation and training services, $56,000. And primary legal counsel, $55,000. Engineering services, there's actually a state law that does require competition for engineering services. We found that the district had not procured mechanical engineering services in a competitive way for air conditioning projects in 2012 and 2014 as required by state law, and actually you all do have a policy regarding engineering services. Payments for those services in 2012, 13, and 14 totaled approximately $415,000. And as I said, there's a state law requiring competition for that type of services, and you actually do have a board policy there. Solar panels, the district negotiated solar panel costs with the vendor and awarded the project sole source rather than competitively. Negotiated cost of $362,500, comprised of 5 annual lease payments after which the district could renew it. The total project could cost as much as $2.1 million. Again, it may be a fair price, but we like to see competition in situations like that. The district also had some issues with prevailing wages. There are requirements that certain wages have to be paid, and initially for that project they were not paying the prevailing wage, but I understand that problem has been corrected. We also always look at project files when there's big engineering services contracts or when they're installing solar panels or building new buildings or things like that. We want to see complete files. We had problems finding bid documentation for bidders who did bid on contracts and didn't receive awards. The district basically retained a bid summary document, but not the actual bids and the actual underlying documentation of those that have bid on contracts. There's also a requirement for construction projects, a state law requirement. This is just for construction projects, of public advertisement of bids for construction projects exceeding $15,000. And there were problems with that documentation. In some cases, there was no documentation. So our recommendation, of course, always flows from our finding. We need to see competitive bidding for purchases in accordance with board policies and state law. And where there aren't board policies, there should be. And we would expect that all significant purchases, you can pick the number, 10,000, 15,000, whatever it is, would be subject to competitive bidding. You will save the school district money if you do that. Contracts. This deals not with procurement of goods, but performance of the contract once there's a contract in place. We found that there were situations where the district did not always monitor contracts effectively. In some cases, did not enter into written contracts as required by state law. The district did not require their transportation services provider to comply with fuel contract requirements. The district did not enter into fully executed contracts for some services before contractors provided the services. Sometimes the services were started and the contract was signed after the fact. Affirmations, for example, there are, in the E-Verify program, there's a requirement that anybody participating in that verifies that illegal aliens were not hired and being used to perform that contract. That's actually a requirement that there's an affidavit executed, and that did not occur. So again, our recommendations are make sure you're monitoring your contracts, make sure you're following proper verification requirements and attestations. Let me talk a little bit about disbursements. That's payments made out by the district to different organizations. We reviewed, we can't review them all, or we would be here for years, so we picked 50 disbursements totaling almost $1 million for 2012, 2013, and 2013, 2014. Here's the type of thing that we found. There was, for example, several purchases were coded to incorrect accounts. Invoices for some expenditures were not submitted, resulting in the school district paying late fees. There's also some issues with the alternative certification program that the district uses. The alternative certification program offers non-traditional methods to obtain teacher certifications by allowing individuals to teach while they're completing their certification requirements, and that's a good program to have. A lot of districts have that, and the district will often pay tuition for participating employees. We found that the Human Resources Department did not document approval of employee participation in those programs, did not report tuition payments as taxable fringe benefits, or document justification for not reporting them. Generally, the IRS requires that if there's a certain amount. If the value of that alternative certification is over $5,000, it has to be reported to the IRS, or you can have some federal tax liability problems. We found some issues with noncompliance in that case as well. So we're asking again that the district provide additional oversight of disbursements, including approving a monthly list of bills paid, which was not occurring and does occur in most school districts. And the district has already implemented that recommendation. And that they make sure that they have a written policy for alternative certification programs and they comply with all IRS requirements relative thereto. Finding number 9 relates to purchasing cards. We found that the district does not monitor or limit purchasing card effectively. For example, there are certain limits that are not always followed, and in some cases the limits are excessive. Many employees have monthly cycle limits significantly greater than what's necessary to cover their actual needs. Some people even had as high as a $50,000 monthly limit. We didn't see a reason for anybody to have something like that. Most of us don't have credit cards with limits that are that high. As of April 2014, the district had 154 P cards assigned to various personnel departments and schools. Annual P card expenditures are $2.7 million, so it's a lot. Now, we think most of those expenditures are justified. I'm not saying that money was wasted, but we thought that there was not adequate control to make sure that these people really needed to buy these things and they really needed to have those high of a limit on their P cards. As for purchases, we reviewed about $90,000 worth of purchases from 10 P cards. We do a sampling. We don't look at everything. And we found several issues with them. Employees purchased items with P cards that were specifically prohibited by the district purchasing card manual. So there were some unauthorized purchases made there. You can read more about it in the audit. Several purchases appeared to us to be unreasonable or did not benefit the school district. Travel, for example, to a superintendent summit in Tampa, Florida, which the district paid for relatives to attend as well, would not be appropriate. Furniture purchased for the offices of certain district employees appeared to be excessive, including $1,500 for a painting. The district did not bid or receive quotes or receive school board approval for several very large P-card purchases, including a spa and a wellness program gift cards. If you add those two together, you're talking about over $50,000. District also made routine supplies purchases from several vendors totaling more than $15,000 during the 2013-2014 year. We found problems with documentation of purchases. Some invoices were not signed by card holders, and in some cases we couldn't even locate key forms or documentation. Our recommendation is better controls over the purchasing cards. This is not an uncommon finding. People get a card and they just kind of go crazy with it sometimes, and it's very important for people to really monitor those cards because there's a lot of potential for abuse. We did not find any theft here. We didn't find anybody charging their personal items on the school card, but when you have really high limits and a lot of cards out there not monitoring, there's always the potential for that. So I'm not saying any inappropriate purchases occurred, but what I am saying is the controls in place necessary to ensure that there's no improper purchases were not there. The district is fully committed to improving the purchasing system and has already implemented significant changes to the P-card system that we think are good and show a positive direction for the school district. I'm not going to go through all the rest of the audit. Those are the main findings, but we did find problems with cell phones, tablets, and internet service. You can read about that in finding number 10. There was a lot of money paid, over $100,000 in some cases, for high-speed internet to members of the school board. In some cases, people we didn't even know who they were getting high-speed internet paid for by the district. Capital assets. Inventory control is a significant issue in school districts. In the old days, 20, 30 years ago, inventory was like this podium or this table, and no one stole that stuff, so no one really worried that much about inventory. Well, you know what inventory is today. It's iPads, it's cell phones, it's things that can be stolen, things that have value. So we're really asking across the entire state, not just here, for much tighter control over inventory because it's so easy to steal it. When we did the Kansas City School District recently, we found, it was a couple of years ago, I think we found close to $2 million worth of unaccounted for electronic inventory, which most we think has just been stolen by people. So it's very important that that be corrected, that physical inventory be done on a regular basis, and that if there's something missing, there be efforts to monitor it. If it's electronic equipment, you can actually put something in the equipment that it can be located if it's stolen, so you can actually find who stole it and bring that person to justice. We found some significant issues with fuel use and controls. I won't go into all the details, you can read about it, but basically what we want to see is that people aren't using gas for their personal purposes rather than they should be using it just for school district purposes. And we aren't saying anybody stole anything, but what we're saying is the records weren't good enough for us to tell. Sunshine law. This is very important to members of the media. When you close a meeting, and it's also important to a lot of members in the district, people who live in the district, people are entitled to attend school board meetings, and normally there's a presumption that they're open to the public. But there are legitimate reasons you can close those meetings, for example, to discuss sensitive personnel matters. In the case here, we found the board did not always comply with the sunshine law and held numerous improper closed meetings. Meetings that they said were closed and had to be closed for legitimate reasons under the sunshine law, but when we actually look, we get to look at what they discuss. They did not appear to be properly closed. This is a common finding in school districts. We don't know that there was any intentional misconduct. We're just asking for people to be very careful, because when you deny the public and the media access to a meeting, it has to be for a very, very specifically defined purpose, and the people have to be are entitled to know why you closed the meeting. We found that there was some looseness with that aspect of the situation. We found some problems with the computer controls. It would be easy for unauthorized people to access computers. Hacking is a big deal these days. Even some of the most secure systems are hacked. We felt the district really needed to take it up a notch in making sure you don't have unauthorized access to your school computer system. Password controls were weak, there were problems with backup data, and there was not an adequate disaster recovery system, because in some cases if the system goes down, there would be no way then to access those records due to a lack of a backup situation. So we asked that all those be fixed. There was a couple of problems with restricted funds. Sometimes the district received gifts and they were for use for a specific purpose. We found that the accounting for those to make sure they were only being used for the specific purpose authorized was inadequate, and so we asked that those be improved as well. There were some problems with the school store. The high school store, for example, school personnel did not use functions available to them, functions the district could provide to record sales and maintain inventory balances, and did not conduct periodic physical inventories. We found a problem with the previous internal auditor, had a conflict of interest, which we've identified in there. We understand that issue has been resolved. That is a very quick summary, 35-minute summary of a very long report. I think that it's easy for people to get really mad, and it's easy for me to look like I'm out here trying to shame people. That is not what our objective is. What we want to see is improvement. There were serious problems. We probably never received more hotline calls in our office than we did about this district since I've been auditor. There were a lot of concerns. It turned out those concerns were very legitimate concerns, and you all who contacted our office, you all who asked us to do this audit, who basically inundated our office with requests, you had reason to ask for that audit, and we're really proud that we came in here. We had a great team in here that did it. We are not interested in anybody hurting or causing any trouble for anybody. What we're interested in is seeing that the problems are fixed. That's what we're interested in. And we will be back. I think we're going to give the district a good amount of time because, we found a lot. So normally our 90-day rule is the rule. We come back 90 days later. We're willing to give you all a little more time. We will be back. And I will tell you, when we come back in 3, 4, 5 months, whenever it is, if all these problems are fixed, I'm going to be the first person to say you can be confident that your school district is now well run, the problems are behind you, and nothing would make me happier than to be able to do that. It's an honor to serve you. I love my job as state auditor. We're here to try to improve the situation. Thank you for bringing these problems to our attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. If anybody has a question, you can just step up to the mic, and I can stay for about 10 minutes, and I got to hit the road. Thanks. Questions? Members of the media? Did I cover it that well? Yes, please step up. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. When returning to review in 3 or 4 months the compliance of the audit recommendation, I assume that the recommendations of the audit concerning future years will be followed. But with examples of personnel receiving higher salaries without proper qualifying conditions, will the state audit review the situation to determine if these present salaries are adjusted downward by the Board of Education?
Well, what we're going to see is we're going to come back and make sure that any salaries that are in place are on the approved salary schedule and that nobody's getting more than what's on the approved salary schedule. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, please come up.
I'm probably going to need a microphone. In fact, I'm not going to use it. You repeatedly use the term the district. Can you explain to me what the district as a legal definition is and which way this information is flowing? Do we look to our Board of Education now to find a way to be comfortable with the information flowing down to them?
Right.
And is the circuit breaker an administrative issue not communicating with the board, or is it the board not providing proper oversight, or a combination?
It's a combination of the two. And as I said when I started, I don't like to point out individuals. That's for other people to do. If there's personal individual misconduct, that's for law enforcement to look at, and they are looking at that, and I don't know what the answer to that question is going to be. But what we found were that some problems came from the superintendent's office, in some cases with the HR department. So a lot of cases, the board was kept in the dark about what was going on, so you couldn't blame them. In other cases, though, their oversight should have been better. So it's a combination of all those things.
But should they have been aware of all this, or is this just something that we just need to fix?
It's something we need to fix. I mean, school board members I found to be conscientious. We have no issue with the level of conscientiousness here, but there was a lot of information they simply weren't getting over a long period of time.
And I would like to thank the Board of Education for all the work that's done. I really would.
Okay, I can take a couple more questions if anybody has any. In the back, yes.
Is there going to be any more internal kind of audit reports, or are we just waiting for this 1, 3, 4 months away? Are we going to have minor reports along the way?
We aren't going to, but what I'm very pleased the district has agreed to do is they're going to post all of our recommendations online, and you're going to be able to track their implementation in real time over that period. That's a process that was first done by the Rockwood School District outside of St. Louis, and it's proven to be a very effective model because then you all can really be engaged in the process as it unfolds. So we will come back after this. We'll work out with the board what the right period of time is and issue another audit report. But my understanding is the district itself is committed to letting you know that progress along the way, and I think that's a very, very good way to do things.
Now, other schools with similar low scores
The takeover by the state is completely different criteria. That has to do with performance and test scores and things the auditor does not look at. So we would not be involved in that. Yes?
You gave fair ratings to St. Louis, Kansas City, Hickman Mills. You found a lot of problems with that. So what ranked the poor rating here? Was it just the depth of the issues, or was it the number of the issues?
It was both. One was if you look at the total number of findings, it's very high, but also the total number of dollars involved in that stipend system. I mean, $25 million over 8 years, maybe $40 million over 14 years. That's a staggering amount of money, and that's why it got the lowest rating.
Is it fair to say or unfair to say that there was, as I read the report, was there some loss of institutional control here?
Yeah, I mean, what ended up happening was you all see something about here's how much somebody's supposed to be paid, and that bore very little relationship with what people are actually being paid. So certainly there was a loss of institutional control, yes.
But with the other things as well, I mean, not getting out the bond rating, that sort of smacks of a good old boy network.
It's very common, though, across the state. I've been on a little effort to try to change that. In fact, my office is sponsoring legislation in Jefferson City to try to make it mandatory. Many states around the country have mandatory competitive bidding of bonds. We're one of the states that does not.
One more over here.
Yes.
At the state level, how often is a school district required to have a state to be reviewed?
There is no requirement for an audit. And then you have your own requirements for an internal audit or for your own auditor. For the state auditor to come in, it's entirely within our discretion. Most of the time when we come into a school district, it's because we receive a petition. There's a petition process where if you get a certain number of signatures, which is established by state law depending on the size of the school district and how many people voted in the last governor's election, once we get the signatures, we are by law then required to come in. But we do discretionary audits too, and we usually do them when there's a lot of hotline calls coming in and when we have reason to believe there may be a problem. So this was a discretionary one. You know, if you add up the total number of entities I have to audit around the state, it's something like 10,000. If you add up the number I can do in a year, it's about 150. So we really have to prioritize. Thank you very much. It's an honor to serve you all, and I'll hopefully be back here in a few months just to give you all good news. Thanks.
Well, there you have it. Right from Oak Grove Elementary, and maybe a little less time than what we thought, but he says, Mr. Schweich said, I didn't want to go through the entire audit and go list by list by list, but he hit what he felt was the high points. St. Joseph School District released by Tom Schweich, the audit released by Tom Schweich. I have with me, of course, Steve Boer from St. Joseph News Press, who's been following this all along. Thanks for being with us, Steve. And I guess from the very beginning, the question has been money. And Mr. Schweich said that the stipends is what really led the auditor's office. It wasn't a petition, but it was the hotline calls that led them to come here and audit the St. Joseph School District.
Yeah, apparently there was a call for action from the St. Joseph community. And yeah, Bob, it all comes back to those stipends. The compensation policies and procedures for the St. Joe School District were a mess. And Mr. Schweich admitted that. And, you know, there's some startling figures that he threw out. You know, $25 million in stipends, and that's what they were able to track. Yeah. It could have been $40 million.
Yeah, he said up to $40
million. And so when you hear those numbers, you know, it's almost, you know, boggling of the mind that much money has been awarded without board permission, without proper documentation, without even policies or reasons as to why that money should have been paid out. And the overall tenor of Mr. Schweich's comments, and I'm glad he came up personally to do this and gave a very sobering presentation. And the reason that I would tell you it's sobering was because I found myself getting angry kind of as he spoke. I mean, it was just, you know, incident after incident after incident of really, really bad management and just people doing what they want.
Yeah, well, we both have been making some notes here. The unauthorized stipends, staff members getting promotions without proper degrees, unreasonable purchases using school funding, improper closed meetings and mismanagement of bond funds. He concentrated there for several minutes on the sunshine law and our ability as reporters and journalists to get into those meetings right up the street. And there's been several incidents where we were not allowed into certain meetings that weren't necessarily personnel meetings, which are closed.
Exactly right, and Bob, you know, KNPN and News Press have been banging on people, you know, that you're just having, you know, closed meetings. You're not giving specific reasons as to why those meetings are closed. There for a while they weren't giving advance notice, and you know, I think in the audit it said somewhere in the last 2 years there's been 40 closed meetings. That's an astonishing number of closed meetings, and according to Mr. Schweich's auditors, not many of those were for legitimate purposes. Yeah. And so yeah, that's very frustrating to people who want to know how their school district is being managed. Is to have them go in a closed meeting and you never know what's being discussed.
Yeah, what came out of that?
Yeah.
Well, of course, the whole thing, Mr. Schweich and his staff, it's all about the numbers. A lot of numbers to sort through tonight. Let's take a look at the audit by some of the numbers that we just heard Mr. Schweich talk about. First up, the audit revealed that the taxpayer footed the bill for the superintendent, Fred Zerwanka's $45 Sam's Club membership. You made the point earlier. You're making well into six figures and we're paying for your $45 Sam's Club?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't even get you to pay for mine, Bob.
No, I wouldn't. I'm sorry. You have to buy that on your own. Also, a $1,500 painting in the COO Rick Hardigan's office. And that's been quite a bit of discussion on that, too, kind of behind the scenes, but we've heard that in the past. And both Zerwanka and Hardigan are now, of course, on paid administrative leave. What I guess my thought is what are some of the top officials? You can't put yourself really in their mind, but what are they thinking? Is this something that's just, it's such a huge budget, not going to be noticed, or these are just discretionary funds, or they're justified? I don't know.
You know,
I can't ask you to speak for them, but I just want your impressions.
I think it comes down to two things: history and probably a little bit of arrogance. I think these guys have been doing this for so long, haven't been caught. They've hid so many things from the board, and nobody's called them on it. And I just think that you know, when you do something and nobody notices and you keep doing it and you keep doing it, I just think it becomes second nature. You just go ahead and, you know, with the electronic signatures, you just go ahead and sign, you know, the board president's name with an electronic signature and do what you want. Well, and I think the other thing a little bit too is arrogance. You know, I mean, I don't think that they, you know, expected that these stipends would raise such a furor.
But the amount of them.
Agreed.
And it's so all-encompassing. I mean, so wide-focused that it was just.
Yeah.
As he said, it's sort of a slush fund.
He did call it a slush fund. He said it was a startling amount of stipends that are given out, and you know, I just think, Bob, I just think that this has been going on for a long time, and you know, the more you get away with something, kind of the more you're you know, confident that, you know, that you're not going to be caught.
That was easy. Let's try this.
Yeah. And you know, the good thing about Auditor Schweich's appearance is this. Okay, this isn't the media making these accusations. This isn't, you know, some member of the public who, you know,
with
has
an axe to grind
with
against
an axe
the
to
district.
grind. Yeah, this is your Missouri state auditor who's saying this. There's no place to hide now. You have to admit this. You can't spin it, because I don't know that there was anything in there that you could spin positively. And so the run and hide part is over. The board has a lot of work to do, and they're not going to be able to smooth this over. They're not going to be able to say, well, this will just go away, because he said he was going to follow up. And so, yeah, I'm glad he came. I'm glad that message was delivered.
A couple of other things that kind of stuck with me. 4,000 gallons of missing gasoline. How do you miss 4,000 gallons of fuel And he said, of course, it wasn't being monitored that closely.
Yeah, there was some talk in the audit about the pumps not being calibrated, that they had never been calibrated, and that,
Which the state, of course, does come in and calibrate pumps
Yes.
that you and I pump our gas out of at the local
Yeah.
convenience store.
Yeah,
but
and
not the school district.
And I
guess.
think too many people were given permission to use those tanks, and you know, supposedly if a pump isn't calibrated, it can be off by as much as 12%, and you're supposed to recalibrate then every now and then. You're supposed to go in and recalibrate those things and stuff like that. I think it was probably that a little bit. And I've also heard that a lot of administrators pulled through that lot, filled their cars up with gas often. And so, yeah, that's, 4,000 gallons of gas. I mean, that's, what do you say they'd have to drive at least for the...
Several thousand miles within the district.
Right. Tough to do.
I guess if you're out cruising around, just cruising for the sake of cruising, I guess you could rack up that many miles. I don't know.
It's a lot of trips to Bessie Ellison and back.
Yeah, even out to Bessie, it would be a lot of trips.
Yeah.
And you would think, I mean, do they have a security camera on that pump in that immediate area? There's security cameras everywhere else.
Maybe they should. I mean, it's, some of the
Maybe
depth.
we should put one down there. I don't know. It's a thought.
Yeah, we could maybe put a weather cam up there,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, and that speaks to the depth of just how far this goes. It's little things like the $45, dollar Sam's Club membership, which, in the grand scheme of things, that's never going to make your audit poor. But $40 million possibly in stipends, I mean, that's a huge amount.
Yeah. And let's get to. We have about 5.5 minutes left here, Steve. What about? That's the main crux of the whole thing. That's what got the state auditor here. That's what drew the attention. That's what all the furor is about on social media and at the meetings. The stipends. What are your main thoughts on the?
Well, I think that what the board has to do is they need to sit down and they need to take a close, objective look at their salary schedules. Whether they want to roll some of those stipends into contracts, that may be what they want to do. But, according to Missouri statute, everybody who's a state employee has a contract, or most do. And if you're under contract, your contract has to represent the total level of compensation that you have. Well, they were issuing contracts for a base salary, but then in one instance they were given $40,000 extra dollars.
The stipend was equal or possibly even more than the base salary.
Right. So what you have to do if you want to provide that compensation, Bob, is you got to reissue that contract. The face amount on that contract has to reflect the total compensation that you're going to receive. And apparently that wasn't done. No contracts were reissued. Well, I shouldn't say none because I don't know that, but not many contracts were reissued and weren't signed. And the board apparently didn't approve of many of them either. So.
I guess wasn't. I think mentioned once or twice maybe was Bo Musser tonight. Does this bring some vindication to his situation?
Well, if I were Bo Musser, I'd probably be running a victory lap around the administrative offices. I actually, through some third-hand exchange, got a copy of Bo's internal audit that he performed on the school district clear back in February or March, because he knew the auditors were coming in, and he knew that he better conduct this internal audit and figure out where their problems were. A lot of those issues that were in that internal audit were actually also pointed out in Auditor Schweich's report as well. And last, one of the other points that I think we need to highlight is this issue of financial condition. Auditor Schweich said that the financial condition of the school district is eroding, and that it needs careful watch, and that people should be aware that the financial condition is deteriorating. And so I think that you probably have to govern, if you're the board, under that assumption.
Yeah.
That this river of money that flows through your offices is going to be decreasing a little bit, particularly after the summer school.
Yeah, after
news
that whole
broke.
thing that will not be paid for now.
Right, and so I think that the board and administrators need to be very, very cautious of how precarious their financial condition is. Not only does Auditor Schweich say that, but then we've also heard from other legislators that this audit has raised eyebrows down in Jeff City.
Yeah.
And as you well know, Bob, that if it gets to a certain point, the state will come in and take control. They've done it before. They've done it with St. Louis. They've done it with Kansas City before.
2 audited schools are no longer in existence. School districts.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this goes back to 2011, of course, and St. Joseph Stands is, I guess, the only public school to get a poor rating, according to the website, the auditor's website. 2 poor ratings were delivered in November of 2011 to the Kansas City chartered schools. See, overall, what does the rating mean? We need to wrap up here in just a second, but what is this bad rating? The worst rating you can get. What does that mean to the St. Joseph? Where do we go from here? We've got the re-up of the levy coming up.
Yeah, I don't know if that levy's going to be re-upped in the near future. Certainly until not some of these things are taken care of, and it's too bad.
Yeah,
because they do need the money. I mean, it'll be tough for them to exist without that 63-cent extension. But I mean, this audit highlights a problem the board has, and that's trust. I don't think the general public. I think they've lost a little faith. I think the teachers in the classroom, they go in there, they try every day to drill knowledge into heads, and stuff like that, and yet they're expected to absorb cuts and 2% raises.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of board and also the district officials. So
exactly.
Well, Steve, thanks for joining us, and also for you at home, we appreciate this special presentation of Auditor Schweich's public release of the St. Joe School District's audit. Look for more on this story online at newspressnow.com, and join us tonight, of course, at 9 for community reaction to the audit results. That's right here on Fox 26. Thanks for being with us.